There are surnames that are spoken in whispers. And then there's Gambino, a bloodline that didn't conquer power, it crushed it. Immense wealth, silent betrayals, and a coldness that operated without leaving a trace. It all began with Carlo Gambino, a criminal mind shaped in the alleys of New York. A mind as sharp as a blade, a will forged in Sicilian vengeance. While the world changed, he built his empire from the shadows, an invisible puppeteer, whose strings always ended in blood. But the most disturbing thing wasn't how he reached the top. It was how he managed to stay there, dodging 1,000 blades ready to cut his throat. His heir, Paul Castellano, looked like a king without a crown, a businessman among killers, hated for smelling like perfume, not gunpowder. Then came John Gotti, brilliant, bold, unstoppable, a mobster who lived for the flash and died for the spotlight. His rise was meteoric, his fall inevitably. From Gambino's calculated silence to Gotti's reckless noise, the story of this family isn't just a criminal legend. It's a warning. Even the most feared empires can collapse when ego outweighs loyalty. The origins of Carlo Gambino. At the beginning of the 20th century, the narrow streets of Palermo mixed elegance with danger. Impeccable carriages, tailored suits, and glances that could kill. Many of those distinguished men weren't aristocrats, they were mafiosi. They called themselves the Society of Honor, a clan that combined ancient codes with ruthless violence, ruling every corner of daily life with an iron hand. It's no coincidence that from those very streets emerged some of the most feared godfathers in history. On August 24th, 1902, in that same setting, a child was born. One who would later build the most powerful criminal empire on the planet. His name, Carlo Gambino. The son of an influential family, with the Mafia deeply rooted in his blood, he grew up under both the protection and the threat of the Cosa Nostra. He lived in a neighborhood where neither the police nor the army dared to enter. There, crime wasn't an anomaly. It was the norm. The influence of Don Vito. Neither the police nor the military dared to cross those streets. They were ruled by a power older than the state itself, and far more feared, the Mafia. Young Carlo silently observed those men of respect. They had it all: authority, fortune, and an almost religious devotion from those around them. They walked with elegance. They imposed their will without raising their voices. Men took off their hats when they saw them. Women kissed their hands. They wore no crowns, but they were kings. And among them, one reigned without question, Don Vito Cachofero, the absolute boss of the Society of Honor. He possessed charisma, cold blood, and a criminal intuition that Carlo would never forget. Don Vito wasn't just another thug. He didn't shoot on impulse, nor destroy out of pride. He turned fear into business. Where others intimidated through violence, he offered protection in exchange for a reasonable fee. And the merchants, far from resisting, gladly paid. Because, under his shadow, danger disappeared. Carlo watched everything. And he didn't dream of being like him. He dreamed of surpassing him, the birth of the criminal. Carlo wasn't born to watch from the sidelines. He wanted to be in the center. He wanted action, power, respect. He dropped out of school as a teenager. And thanks to his family's connections, he got exactly what he wanted: a position beside Don Vito as his trusted man. When a merchant fell behind on payments, Carlo didn't negotiate. He simply arranged an accident. At first glance, he didn't look intimidating. He stood about 5'7", average build, modest clothing. He didn't wear expensive suits or raise his voice. But he had two things that made him dangerous: a nose as sharp as a dagger, and a cunning smile that was never free. He was quiet, reserved, but guided by a philosophy. To survive in this world, you must be half lion, half fox. The fox spots the trap from afar. The lion roars so loud it makes the jackals tremble. Carlo was exactly that. Clever when needed, ruthless when necessary. Don Vito saw it immediately. This kid wasn't a pawn. He was a key piece. At 19, his loyalty, intelligence, and cold-blooded nature earned him an official place in the Society of Honor. But while Carlo was rising, outside Sicily, the world was about to be shaken forever. The leap to America. As Carlo came of age, Italy was becoming increasingly hostile. In the 1922, Benito Mussolini's fascism was gaining strength. And to him, the Mafia wasn't a problem. It was an enemy to be exterminated. Raids, arrests, disappearances. Sicily was no longer a refuge for men of honor. It was a trap. The young mafiosi understood quickly. Staying meant ending up behind bars or underground. Those who had contacts in America used them without hesitation. Carlo had many. On his mother's side, he belonged to the Castellano family, a mafia clan already established in New York. The path was clear: cross the ocean or disappear. In November 1921, Carlo made his decision. He boarded a cargo ship, hidden among barrels of wine and olive oil. His family paid a generous sum to ensure the captain's protection during the voyage. A month later, the ship docked in Norfolk, Virginia, and among the entire crew, only one passenger stepped off slowly. He wore his best suit. He didn't look back. At barely 19 years old, Carlo Gambino set foot on American soil as if it already belonged to him. He wasn't just another immigrant. He was a prince of crime. And he had just arrived in his new kingdom, a new beginning. Shortly before Christmas of 1921, Carlo Gambino began his life in America. He didn't come to try his luck, he came to build power. And he wasn't starting from scratch. He had something others didn't. A family already well positioned within New York's organized crime. They found him a modest apartment near the Brooklyn docks. And it didn't take long before they brought him into the business. The city was thirsty. Prohibition had turned alcohol into liquid gold. While the people begged for a drink, the Mafia filled glasses and pockets. Among the most active were Carlo's cousins, the Castellanos, traffickers disguised as businessmen. Their trucks didn't deliver fruit or furniture. They carried bottles, barrels, and bundles of hidden cash. Gambino didn't take long to find his place, driving calmly, watching with cold blood. He was a chauffeur, yes, but also a bodyguard. And when necessary, he knew exactly when and where to pull the trigger. The first steps in the criminal machine. The smuggling routes were battlefields. Every alcohol delivery during Prohibition could turn into an ambush. Every bottle could cost a life. Rival gangs fought over shipments as if they were bars of gold. And Carlo, increasingly immersed in that world, soon caught the attention of the real bosses. It was then that he met Joe, the boss, Masseria, the Sicilian patriarch, who ruled organized crime in New York without opposition. A symbol of the old school, a true man of honor. Carlo saw the opportunity and didn't let it slip away. He entered Masseria's inner circle, and it didn't take long before his talent began to shine. He was efficient, precise, invisible. He knew how to move money, organize operations, keep his mouth shut, and disappear when necessary. He quickly became indispensable. But he was something more, strategic. He knew that in this world, depending on a single boss was a death sentence, because there, bullets didn't warn, and blind loyalty was the shortest road to the cemetery. Carlo understood perfectly. He wasn't going to die for anyone, not even for Joe, the boss. The beginning of the betrayal. At the beginning of the 1930 seconds, New York's criminal world was on the verge of collapse. Joe, the boss, Masseria, was waging a bloody war against his eternal rival, Salvatore Maranzano, another Sicilian godfather who answered to no one. For young mafiosi like Carlo, it was madness, a war of egos that brought no profit, only corpses. The Mafia was bleeding out from within. Among Gambino's closest allies was someone different, Lucky Luciano. Cold, brilliant, ruthless. Luciano didn't want to win. He wanted to reinvent the rules of power. And he had a plan. Look, Carlo, let's cut to the chase. These old men are ruining everything. Their turf war, their code of honor, they're useless now. While they kill each other out of pride, we could be making a fortune. Do you want to clean house? If they don't move, we erase them. They're dead, and they don't even know it. But I need someone like you, not another thug. Someone with a head on his shoulders. And why trust you? You already have half an army. Because you don't have that shitty ego that ruins everything. You're patient, calculating. And when you need to be cruel, you are without flinching. If I join, I want my cut. No empty promises. You'll have money, power, free reign. But if you betray me, I'll bury you, and then I'll kill you again. And if you double-cross me, I'll cut off your balls and make you swallow them. That's why I want you with me. Deal? Deal. Carlo, the fox, chose his side. And with that silent move, he positioned himself one step from the throne. He didn't soil his hands. He didn't expose himself. He played to win, without risking too much. His objective was simple: to get rich as fast as possible, leaving behind the rusted codes of the old Sicilian Mafia. On the 15th of April 1931, everything changed. Luciano invited Joe, the boss Masseria, to lunch at a restaurant in Coney Island. As he excused himself from the table, 4 armed men entered and executed him in cold blood. With Masseria off the board, Gambino briefly aligned with Salvatore Maranzano, the new capo on the rise. But Maranzano, confident in having those ambitious young men on his side, didn't see the inevitable coming. The betrayal. By Luciano's order, he was murdered in his own office. Shot and stabbed until he died. With his fall, an era closed. And another began. One that Carlo Gambino had known how to choose from the start. The first steps up the ladder of power. With Maranzano's death, a new mafia was born. A generation without nostalgia, without romantic codes, without honor. At its head, Lucky Luciano, who transformed it into what he had always wanted it to be: a business. No more ancient oaths or rituals. Now there were votes, hierarchies, and a criminal board of directors. Each family had its place at the table, and Carlo Gambino, who had played his cards with surgical precision, received his reward. He was placed under the command of Vincent Mangano, the absolute boss of the Brooklyn docks, a key position to control goods, influence, and millions of dollars. From there, Carlo began to build his own empire. He learned the secrets of the dirty business: loans with impossible interest rates, underground gambling, planned thefts of merchandise, all operating efficiently and without noise. And his talent soon bore fruit. At 29, he was promoted to capo, leader of his own mafia crew. His first move was a declaration of intent. He chose his cousin, Paul Castellano, as one of his trusted men. Paul, son of a Brooklyn bookie, had also been born into crime. And Carlo, who understood better than anyone that enemies were often inside, too knew that in this game, you survive only by trusting blood, only blood in the circle. Carlo knew the unwritten rules of power, and he also knew the risks. He had seen betrayals arise from within, and he knew that in the mafia, the true enemy often ate at the same table. That's why he didn't trust just anyone. With Paul Castellano, it was different. He wasn't just loyal, he was family. And for Carlo, blood wasn't a detail. It was the only guarantee. Less time looking over his shoulder meant more time to plot his ascent. So he created something unusual: a closed, hermetic circle reserved only for his own. No cronies, no favors. Only those who shared his surname or his blood could enter. Many said he was overdoing it, that blind trust was a mistake. But Carlo didn't care. In 1932, at 30 years old, he sealed that strategy with one more move. He married Catherine Castellano, Paul's sister, and also his first cousin. A marriage that, for any Catholic, would be unacceptable. But in the mafia, it wasn't about religion. It was about power. It wasn't an act of love. It was a masterstroke. A fusion of two criminal lineages that armored his control and eliminated any fissure, opportunity among ruins. Carlo and Catherine settled in a modest home in Brooklyn. They had 3 sons and a daughter. From the outside, everything seemed normal. A loving, disciplined, devout father. But neither marriage nor fatherhood managed to curb his ambition. Power remained his only obsession. In 1933, prohibition came to an end. And with it, many mafiosi saw their fortunes collapse. Alcohol smuggling ceased to be profitable. But Carlo saw what others did not. Where most saw the end, he saw a new opportunity. Alcohol still had a market if you dodged the taxes. So he did. He began selling cheaper than the legal liquor stores and thus achieved his first major stroke of fortune. But it did not go unnoticed. In 1937, he was convicted of tax evasion after running a clandestine distillery that had produced more than 1 million gallons in Philadelphia. Even so, he emerged almost unscathed. A minor conviction, not a single day behind bars. And he didn't lose momentum. In 1941, with the United States entering World War II, Carlo was already thinking about how to turn the conflict into profit. The government began rationing essential goods: meat, chocolate, gasoline, even nylon stockings. Every scarce commodity was the same to him: a gold mine waiting to be exploited, black market and extortion. During the war, ration coupons became as valuable as gold. And Carlo, as always, found a way to turn them into money. His crew stole them, forged them, and accumulated them by the thousands. When the government tried to protect them by storing them in banks, Carlo did what he did best: he bribed. A couple of envelopes under the table, and the coupons returned to his hands. Black money kept flowing in, another million added to the account. But for Gambino, it was never enough. Soon after, he spotted another niche, one that almost no one in the Mafia touched: bars frequented by homosexual men. Carlo wasn't interested in the lights, the music, or the atmosphere. What he saw was another opportunity. In an era when coming out could destroy reputations, those bars were frequented by influential professionals: lawyers, doctors, businessmen. Gambino wasn't looking to protect anyone. He was looking to extort. He built a precise and ruthless blackmail network. He threatened to expose them and charged for his silence. While others used violence, Carlo played with something far more powerful: fear, secrets, and silence. By the 1950 seconds, he already had the reputation of being one of the biggest money makers in the entire organization. And the most impressive thing was that he hadn't even reached the top yet, the blood throne. Carlo Gambino was already a key figure within the Mangano crime family. But his rise had stalled. In 1951, the family boss, Vincent Mangano, vanished without a trace. And everyone knew who was behind it: Albert Anastasia, his right-hand man, and Carlo's direct rival. Anastasia was feared even among killers. They called him the Lord of Death, and he led the brutal squad of hired assassins known as Murder Incorporated. His reputation wasn't built on words, but on corpses. In 1956, Anastasia appointed Carlo as his second in command. A risky move, and apparently a generous one. But Carlo wasn't fooled. He knew he would never inherit the throne through traditional means. Both were already past 50, but Anastasia still had plenty of energy, and a violence that was far from extinguished. Carlo, true to his style, didn't raise his voice, but he made a silent and final decision. The path to power had to be cleared, and he didn't hesitate. On October 25, 1957, Anastasia entered his usual barbershop at the Park Sheraton Hotel in the heart of Manhattan. They placed a hot towel over his face. And then, 2 men burst in. 5 shots. The last bullet pierced his skull. End of the road. With his death, Nothing stood between Carlo and absolute power. He had achieved it without outbursts, without scandals. Only with intelligence, patience, and a precise dose of blood. Now, he was the supreme boss of the Mangano family. But not for long, because that family would soon bear his name. The Gambino family had just been born, the new godfather. At 55 years old, Carlo Gambino reached his ultimate goal, to become the absolute head of his own crime family. He had eliminated rivals, neutralized threats, and taken control without ever raising his voice. Now, his name no longer only inspired fear. It was a legend. The newly named Gambino family controlled the Brooklyn docks, an artery through which millions in goods flowed, and even more in bribes. But Carlo wasn't a static boss. He knew that true power isn't inherited, it's multiplied. He diversified his businesses. Illegal gambling, manipulation of construction contracts, and even financial fraud on Wall Street. In 1962, he sealed a masterstroke. He arranged the marriage of his eldest son, Tommy, to the daughter of one of New York's most powerful capos, Thomas Lucchese. It wasn't a wedding, it was a pact. Thanks to that alliance, Gambino gained access to a new million-dollar business, control of the John F. Kennedy Airport. They diverted entire shipments, bribed unions, and employees reported exactly when and what was arriving. Money was no longer earned with guns. It arrived on time, like a Swiss watch, and without leaving a trace. The business of silence. While money flowed from the port and the airport, Carlo Gambino continued expanding his empire. This time, he set his sights on a key sector of the city, the garment industry. No less than 70% of all clothing sold in the United States passed through New York factories. And where there is volume, there are weak points. He infiltrated the small but powerful truckers' unions, and with that, he took absolute control of goods transportation. The equation was simple. If a company didn't pay, its clothes never reached the stores. Extortion, without the need for gunfire. Old-school business. Faithful to the code of omertà, Gambino ran his empire from his modest home in Brooklyn. No luxurious offices, no compromising phone calls. The most delicate decisions, even about who should die, were made in his dining room. Sometimes, a slight nod was enough. He didn't speak. He didn't sign. He left no trace. And that's why no one could touch him. His silence was his best armor. And his mind, the reason no one dared to challenge him. The power of not shining. Carlo Gambino had it all. Money, influence, absolute power. But instead of showing it off, he hid it. He avoided cameras, interviews, parties. He wasn't seen in shiny Cadillacs or surrounded by bodyguards. He preferred an old gray Oldsmobile, worn but discreet. And he lived in a modest house in Brooklyn, like any retired man in the neighborhood. That was his armor. Invisibility as strategy. While others sought fame, he bet on anonymity. And it worked. His low profile was his most effective shield. To the public, he was just an elderly immigrant, polite, almost endearing. But to those who truly knew him, his name carried more weight than a loaded gun. Allies and enemies whispered the same thing. Betrayal was his native language. He didn't fear eliminating those who had helped him rise, if that meant staying on top. By the late 1962, the Gambino family had 25 active crews, and more than 800 men under his command. Without question, he was the most powerful man in New York. And most surprising of all, he was never naturalized. He never finished school. And yet, he built a criminal empire worth millions. Constructed not under the spotlights, but from the shadows. The king in the shadow. On one of his rare nights out, Carlo Gambino attended a Frank Sinatra show. And although the singer was the star on stage, everyone knew exactly who commanded the room. Between sets, Sinatra invited him backstage to his dressing room. And not just him, the entire entourage joined. The second show, scheduled for 10 p.m., was delayed by 40 minutes. No one interrupts the dawn, not even Sinatra. But Carlo's devotion didn't end with his criminal family. He was also deeply tied to his family by blood. He wanted to keep his eldest son, Tommy, away from crime. That's why he sent him to study at Manhattan College. An uncommon choice for the son of a godfather. By his side was his wife, Catherine. A quiet woman, but a crucial one. She never asked questions, but she was the heart of the home. When the toughest mobsters crossed that door, Catherine welcomed them with an espresso and a smile. She always asked about their families, about their children, and with that, she completely disarmed them. Thanks to her, the Gambino house looked like any other in the neighborhood. Warm, orderly, almost respectable. But that facade didn't fool everyone. The feds knew exactly what was behind it. They knew that within those walls lived the most powerful criminal in the country. And because of that, without rest, the house was under constant surveillance, day and night. The beginning of the end. By the late 1960s, Carlo Gambino's reign began to show cracks. Small fissures that, over time, would become impossible to conceal. In 1969, John Gotti, an associate of the family, was captured along with his brother while stealing a cargo truck at JFK Airport. The incident didn't directly affect the business, but it set off every alarm. Media and police attention refocused on the Godfather. A year later, Carlo was formally charged with having orchestrated a violent robbery. But, as so many times before, his lawyer managed to delay the process indefinitely. This time, however, the law wasn't his only enemy. His wife, Catherine, was diagnosed with cancer. And in 1971, after a long battle, she passed away. For Carlo, it was a blow that neither justice nor the police had ever managed to give him. One that cut deeper than any sentence. But the problems didn't end there. Frustrated by the endless legal delays, the government decided to take another route. To deport him to Sicily, citing his status as an illegal immigrant. Curiously, every time deportation seemed imminent, Carlo's health mysteriously deteriorated. Sudden heart problems, strategic medical reports. And when doctors finally cleared him to travel, his contacts intervened. The deportation plan collapsed again and again. Gambino was aging. His body was beginning to fail. But his control over everything else remained as firm as ever. The master's final move. When deportation seemed inevitable, Carlo Gambino made his last move. And, as always, it was silent and surgically precise. Two influential members of Congress accepted an under-the-table deal, $1,000 a month for life, in exchange for allowing Carlo to remain on U.S. soil. And so it was. Gambino won his final political battle without moving a single step outside his home. But time, at last, caught up with him. His heart, as cold as it was calculating, began to fail. On the 15th of October 1976, while watching a Yankees game, at his summer home in Long Island, Carlo Gambino died of a heart attack. Thus ended the story of the man who led the most powerful criminal organization in the United States for 2 decades, without having spent a single day in prison. His funeral was a monumental procession. Thousands came from all over the country, some out of respect, others out of fear. But the legend was already eternal. Though his body was buried, what he left behind was far more than a legacy. He left behind a monster, a criminal structure so solid that not even the death of its architect could dismantle it. And yet, in his absence, chaos soon began to surface. Internal conflicts started to erupt, and many knew that this fire had been lit by Carlo himself before he died. The cursed legacy. Before exhaling his last breath, Carlo Gambino left behind 2 things: an empire and a ticking time bomb. He personally chose his successor, and that single decision marked the beginning of the decline. He didn't name any of his sons, not because he didn't love them, but because they weren't ready. None of them carried enough weight within the organization. But for Carlo, blood was still the law. That's why he chose his cousin and brother-in-law Paul Castellano, known as Big Paulie. Paul wasn't a traditional mobster. He never fired a gun. He never collected a debt with his fists. He was a man of numbers, an administrator, not a warrior, but he was family. And decades earlier, the Castellano clan had been instrumental in helping Carlo establish himself in New York. Now, Carlo was returning the favor, but in doing so, he condemned his own creation, because he chose the wrong man. Carlo Gambino built an empire without firing a shot in front of witnesses, without raising his voice, without ever setting foot in a cell. But even the most feared empires fall when the throne ends up in the wrong hands. Was his legacy a triumph, or the beginning of a foretold ruin? You decide. And if this story captivated you, give it a like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because there are still many truths of crime that you're about to discover. See you in the next episode. This isn't over.